This video will contain alley-oop off a cliff-size spoilers for Xenoblade Chronicles. If you haven't beaten the game, I'd recommend playing for the main story and then coming back to watch this video. If you have beaten the game or do not care about spoilers, then welcome. Let's begin. So after some thinking and looking over previous videos, I realized that I talk about a certain aspect of the Xenoblade Chronicles series quite a lot. The world, in this world, the world, these worlds, the world. So yeah, believe it or not, the world's kind of a big deal with the series. With how beautifully striking and diverse the selection of locations on display across the series is, it certainly makes sense that world building plays a pivotal role in shaping each game's identity. Yet, I believe it goes beyond just making pretty environments that are fun to explore. First off, what is world building? According to the definition provided by Leah Zaidi in her article, World Building in Science Fiction, Foresight, and Design, world building is the process of constructing a complete and plausible imaginary world that serves as context for a story. Aside from my desire to avoid the plethora of definitions that refer to it simply as building a world, it was the last detail in her definition that grabbed me. Serves as context for a story. If we were to take a look at each entry within the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise, they all wonderfully connect the created world to the story or struggles of the characters within that story. Since there's a lot to unpack and each title utilizes different strategies to effectively build their world, I figured it would be best to examine one game for now, which would be the original Xenoblade Chronicles. One strength about Xenoblade Chronicles has been its impeccable title screen that comes as a result of its simple yet effective visuals and heavenly music. Funny enough, this title screen is where our examination begins because it illustrates a very strong picture of the world that becomes more apparent as the player plays through the game. There's a vivid blue sky occupying most of the screen space, a flat, grassy plain, and two elements in the Mechon scraps and the Monado, the latter which takes center frame. The simplicity of the title screen puts a larger emphasis on these variables and can present the player with the thought, well, maybe these are important, which is certainly proven. Regarding the Monado, through its placement and position as the main focus of the title screen, the Monado is the most eye-catching and important piece here, just like it is in the narrative. Everything in the game's main story, from the world to the characters, circles around the Monado, and Xenoblade Chronicles tries to make that abundantly clear from the onset. Moving into the game's introduction, we're presented with the two biggest elements of the world that are symbolically represented by those unique variables on the title screen, the Bionis and Mechonis. From a surface-level glance, the world of Xenoblade Chronicles can be summed up by a single screenshot and Adam Howden's narration concerning an endless sea and a boundless sky. The provided image would go on to serve as the setting for about 98% of the game. The other 2% being those kind of trippy space sequences and the final stretch. And you gotta consider the outliers. And is what I believe to be the most creative premise of all the entries. Something about two colossal, dormant titans shrouded in legend acting as the world for various different life forms is so awesome. The game also uses this opening legend to its advantage, as there's always this looming thought about whether the events happened or not. Yet certain cutscenes and lines of dialogue start to reveal to the player that maybe this battle did actually happen. The construction of the world inherently allows for the world to feel connected as well. The Mechonis, which would be thousands of miles away from the starting area of the Bionis, is linked to the naturally based Titan by means of Sword Valley and the Fallen Arm, which gives the player a roadmap to how they might travel the world. And the player's progression through the narrative fleshes out these Titans even further, with the ability to explore each respective environment, the scale of the Titans becoming much more tangible, and story revelations altering their view of the world. Let me break down these elements. When you explore an area like AirC and are able to see the entire rim of the Bionis' head, you might think that the world is pretty large. But what really solidifies that size is when you try to swim from one side to the other to fill out the map, because you realized way too late that all it takes was to visit every landmark to fill it out. Seeing the size is one thing, but traveling it is what's really going to sell the magnitude of these areas. The better acquainted with the scale you are, the more real the Bionis and Mechonis become when you catch a glimpse of them in the distance. I think one of the best features the original title has going for it is the amount of reinforcement that the game feeds you regarding the connectivity of the world. For example, Xenoblade Chronicles absolutely loves to boast its views with a plentiful amount of secret locations and vantage points that allow for the player to take in the surroundings. Yet, some of the most interesting applications are places where you can view previously explored or upcoming locations. From the walkway to Colony 6, you can see Colony 9 tucked away within the Bionis' calf. the gargantuan forms of the Titans hovering over the center point that is the fallen arm, and my personal favorite, the rippling waters of Air Sea acting as a thin sheet over the skies of Machina Forest. Majora's Mask does this tactic quite a lot, with the likes of Woodfall, Snowhead, and especially Stone Tower Temple being present at several different locations. And I praise it immensely in both these games because it helps the player picture the world as a single entity that demonstrates how far you've come, as well as paints a picture in your head of what awaits you. What the hell is the purpose of that giant honeycomb I keep seeing? That line of questioning carries over into Xenoblade Chronicles, where you'll keep getting different angles of the Mechonis the farther you climb, and its portentous presence forms the question, what could possibly await me on Mechonis? Those are the kinds of inquiries that will keep a player hooked and invested to explore the world. And with how common Xenoblade does that with its narrative, it only makes sense for it to hold true with the design of the world. Furthermore, upon entering the threshold of a new area, Xenoblade Chronicles greets the player with a short sequence of shots and a banner that displays the location's name as well as its placement on the Bionis. Alongside those progress updates given by the visuals and dialogue from characters about upcoming destinations, it's a small detail that ingrains the player into the world, and just one I find rather charming. Definitive Edition actually takes this premise even further beyond, with visuals on the area map menus that help to show your approximate location. I believe it's important to make your fictional world feel lived in, and Xenoblade Chronicles also does this quite well, with the lore of the giants hidden in special locations and side quests, and certain lines spoken by the characters. You'll occasionally hear dialogue along the lines of, "What on Bionis?"
What's that you say?
Which is a pretty simple take on the colloquialism we use, "What on earth?" But I view it as this little change that goes a long way to depict how these characters naturally fit into the world. If we glance back at Zaidi's definition, the part I found the most noteworthy was the relevance of world building to set the stage for and establish the narrative. Now that we have an assortment of pieces to work with, how do they fit into the bigger picture that is Xenoblade Chronicles' story? Well, it really comes down to how the imagery on the title screen is fleshed out over the course of the story. Xenoblade Chronicles is driven by Shulk and the party's desire to seek revenge for the tragedies brought upon them by the Mechon. Yet even more important than that is the significance of the Monado and how it dictates the story's direction. This game is built around the mystery of the Monado, and as the player becomes more familiar with the purpose of the Monado and its origins, they similarly gain a better understanding of the world. A good example of this can be traced back to the cutscene Alvis Unlocks a New Power, where the mysterious individual mentions that the Monado emits an ether wavelength in its ground state. Prior to this moment, the knowledge concerning ether that a player has accumulated is likely limited to the recognition of the ether crystals scattered across the world, and that some beings are able to harness it. Overall, the player would probably associate ether with the Bionis. As for the Monado, we know that stories tell that it was the sword used by the Bionis against the Mechonis eons ago. This piece of information offered by Alvis is that extra push needed for the player to start believing the mythos and build the connection between the ether properties of the world and the Monado. This becomes especially apparent following the encounter with the Telephia when Alvis declares this.
The Monado is a divine sword capable of disturbing the very fabric of existence.
These topics are touched upon during the events of Alchemoth, but it's when the party talks with Zanza at Prison Island that the threads are continued. Not only does Zanza confirm the legends about the Monado being the sword of the Bionis, but he clears away the ambiguity left by Alvis' definition by clarifying that the Monado doesn't merely disturb the fabric of existence, but controls it. And that principle is ether. The combined efforts of these two interactions are the key to cementing the unbreakable relationship that exists between the Monado and half of the world being the Bionis. Despite a much greater understanding of how the Monado and Bionis are connected, the rest of the game continues to develop the other side with the Mechonis, the Machina, and its respective Monado. Traveling to the Mechonis via the Fallen Arm grants the player the answer they've been looking for the entire game about what happens on the other side, the side of their enemy. Mechonis Field, Agnirfa, and Central Factory are certainly sights to behold filled with wonderful songs, but the characteristic of world building which the Mechonis have of Xenoblade Chronicles fleshes out so masterfully is the worldview and human element. As the name implies, world building heavily pertains to the physical manifestation that is explored, but crafting a plausible, complete world requires the people in that world to feel real. Something that Xenoblade Chronicles executes immaculately is how the perspectives of these characters will change as they obtain new information or are confronted with challenging situations. These predicaments, in turn, will shift the player's focus to coincide with the characters, and that complexity births relatability and a sense of immersion. To elaborate on this notion, Xenoblade Chronicles' first half is stupendously good about convincing the player that the world is very black and white. There is a good and a bad side to everything you see. Zord's cryptic background lightly throws a wrench into that stance and starts to push the player away from that simplified view, since the faced Mekon's fragmented memories and real name give him human-like qualities. Although, just like a lot of parts of Xenoblade Chronicles' narrative, Prison Island is what makes the greatest shockwaves with the reveal of Fiora as a faced Mechon. All of a sudden, Shulk's thirst for revenge isn't as simple as kill the robots to attain peace of mind. Fiora's reveal implants hesitation into Shulk in such a way that contradicts Zanz's wishes for him to swing the blade to his heart's content. I'd argue that this transforms him into a more relatable protagonist due to the existence of these complex spots. This shift is complemented by Metalface edging Shulk on at Galahad Fortress to kill the other faced Mechon, which further instills questions of morality. Okay, all of this is fine and dandy, but what does this have to do with making the world feel authentic? It comes down to how it mimics reality and our own experiences. Some situations in life can't be boiled down to simply right and wrong. There are gray areas where context is absolutely necessary for an individual to be truly informed on the matter. It's a recognition and willingness to learn more about opposing views or sides that makes someone alluring or feel real. Prison Island and the other developments in Xenoblade Chronicles' story serve as the first steps for Shulk to make this transition, but it's really the introduction of the Machina and Egil's arc that go the extra mile. When the party comes across the Machina on the fallen arm, it comes as a big shock to them because the Mechon are really the only things believed to have inhabited the Mechonis. So when this revelation occurs and not every being from Mechonis is malicious towards the life on Bionis, it builds on Shulk and the party's perspective erected at Prison Island. Adding further fuel to the fire is the Chief, father of Egil, requesting the party to kill his son. What this expresses is that it's not just characters like Shulk, Dunban, and Melia that are granted complexity with their turnaround arcs, but even some of the minor characters. Unfortunately, events in and literally performed by the world itself, like the Bionis' attack on Mechonis, have created a butterfly effect of sorts that altered the lives of characters like Egil, and those alterations in of themselves have affected those around them. Egil's complicated predicament and solution is a side effect of how the world influenced him. And it's those kinds of ripple effects that populate Xenoblade Chronicles with believable, intricate characters. These are some of the heavy themes that I actually think Xenoblade Chronicles 2 pushes even further with its narrative and world building, but oh man, that's a tangent all on its own. A final topic regarding Xenoblade Chronicles' world building that I wanted to explore is the constant mention of the Bionis and Mechonis within cutscenes, and, more importantly, how their reemergence can drastically change the world and plot. Over the course of the narrative, the Bionis is called upon in ways that reinforce its history, like Shulk and Rein honoring the Hom's tradition of returning their deceased back to the Bionis, or Rein comparing their current struggle against the Mechon with the legends of old. These are great ways to keep the player focused on the dynamic relationship between the world and the story, but with regards to the more considerable of the two notions, you can see that the player will be given information about the reawakening of the Bionis several notable times, such as the party's brief pass through the Bionis' interior, the legends told of in Alchemoth, and Alvis' comment about the stirring ether. The same can be said in the Mechonis too, and it feels like the game is building towards the player's goal to prevent the eventual resurrection of these titans. Starting with the Bionis' interior, Shulk acts slightly strange and then comments that it feels like the Bionis isn't really dead. This statement can feel a bit out of left field, but thanks to Rein's words, it's successful at reminding the player that, oh yeah, there are literally thousands of people living on these titans. Their resurrection wouldn't end well, would it? Huh.
Shulk, do you hear it?
Yet the funny thing is that Shulk is exactly right. If you look for the glass window during your first pass through the interior, you can actually see a lung pumping still, which could be a hint at what's to come. Once more clues are given to the player, it becomes much easier to see the real status of the world, and what's to come would be preceded by a sign. Moving on to Alvis, right before entering the High Entia tomb, Alvis answers Shulk's question concerning his ability as a seer and to use the Monado. Particularly haunting is his remark that it could be coincidence or something greater, and that the Bionis is stirring. This line acts as a part 2 of sorts, building off of a conversation with Saurian where the Emperor claims that the resurrection is at hand. These moments successfully bolster the uncertainty regarding the Bionis' awakening that is initially planted in the Bionis Interior's discussion. As for Alchemoth, imagery of the Bionis and Mechonis' clash bombards you pretty soon after entering the Great Hall. If you observe the mural, you'll notice that the Mechonis is the only one that appears to be dealing a blow, which would align with the worldview of those on the Bionis that the Mechonis and Mechon are the true force of evil in this world. However, we know this isn't exactly the case. Examining the battle from the introduction shows that the Mechonis is the one on the defensive for a majority of the engagement. The Bionis is the more aggressive of the two, and seems to go for a fatal blow in the final exchange in comparison to where the Mechonis' final swing was aimed at. Yet this information isn't portrayed in the mural since the truth of that duel was lost to time, and the denizens of the Bionis believe they are in the right. I believe what this example does best is show the age of the world and how perceptions can be altered by history and rhetorical decisions. Supplementing this legend is the discussion between Shulk and Emperor Saurian, where Shulk recounts the tales and explicitly says, bringing forth new life on Bionis. That doesn't include the Machina, because why would it? That truth wasn't passed down, and further separated the world to push Zanza's narrative. The party gets to see the other side of the ordeal when in the capital of Agnirtha, and it is certainly much different than that taught on the Bionis. There's also this ancient script that lies behind Saurian's throne that reads this.
Descendants of Antiqua, when the ether cries, the Bionis awakes. Mistake not the signs, and heed the sword's return. Trap its power, and assure eternal prosperity.
Given that the Monado has only been treated as a savior of sorts by the other lifeforms on the Bionis, this feels like a strange contradiction to what the player knows, and alludes to further mysteries tied to the sword and the world. And of course, that sword cutting its way through the already ravaged lands of Mechonis would eventually reveal the real truth of Meynith and Zanza. I certainly didn't cover a handful of other details that help make the world building superb, such as really diving into the side quests or each location, but I wanted to discuss some of the main concepts and small details I love that help make the Bionis and Mechonis an incredibly creative and immersive world to me. The world building in Xenoblade Chronicles unquestionably checks off the marks regarding the development of both the physical world and its lore, as well as the people within it and how they perceive the world around them. It's this focus on the world and its ties to the narrative that are part of what makes the game such a standout title. Perhaps down the line, I'll examine the sequels to see how they implement their strategies. I think this would allow for a unique and pretty fun observation that compares each of the titles and the tools they utilize for the sake of the narrative. Xenoblade Chronicles X surely has it through its main concept and especially haunting line, but something tells me that Xenoblade Chronicles 2 also has plenty of notions and themes to unpack. Hello there everybody, KJords here, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy this video, or maybe what you've seen on this channel so far, then consider dropping a like and subscribing. My last goal of 2,500 subs was absolutely shattered, like, it's actually kind of ridiculous, so I guess the new goal for now is to hit 5K, and yeah, we'll see where we go from there, but thank you guys so much, that's actually ridiculous. I did not expect this in the slightest. For those that are new to the channel, I primarily do analyses covering Xenoblade with regards to characters, areas, and the story, as well as a game show that is Xenoblade oriented, but I also do cover a handful of other games just to mix it up, which is actually a great segue because coming up next on the channel should be an analysis for a game that I've wanted to cover for a very long time and should be pretty fitting for something that is on the horizon here. So I'm very, very excited to get to work on that and to be able to share it with you guys. Also, if you have noticed that the sound quality is better, that's because I got a new mic. Finally, I've had my old mic since high school. Hopefully the sound quality is better and this will hopefully make the presentation of the videos a lot better for you guys. Anyways, that's really all I have to say for now, so I hope all of you guys have been doing very well and just been taking care of yourselves. And as always, I do appreciate all the support here on the channel, so thank you guys so much. And with that, until next time.